oriented reviews, and this is what made all of us radical then, all of us underground people, to observationally oriented reviews. In other words, we reported on what we heard. Now, there's a real difference between observation and subjective. And let me tell you what it is. Observation is what you heard and what you can describe. Subjective is what you can live with and like, because all things fail. Nothing is perfect. So if it doesn't quite have the dynamic range, but it's battery operated and it's pure and sweet, well, I can't argue with you. You have to decide, but you can't say, this is the best thing I've ever heard, without reference to an absolute sound and without reference to your own failings. So when I get subjective, it's because I say, I don't put this a value much on this, but this is what it sounds like no matter what value I put on it. And if you guys are reading good reviews and that's not in the review, it is not a good review. The reviewer should tell you what he hears, try to give you a sense of the character, and then you go listen for yourself. And you take your favorite records to the store or your favorite sources, and you hear. You don't take my word for it, because I can't tell you what you're going to like. I can tell you what I hear. And sometimes I'm right, and some manufacturers will tell you sometimes I'm not. Anyway, what happened in that time, and I have to tell you this, is that we eliminated many gross distortions in sound. If you remember what equipment sounded like back then, nothing was coherent. We had the bass driver, we had the cleaner, and we had things in between. But it was all coming out. You could listen to Dusty Springfield, you know, the sax section of The Look of Love. You'd hear 3 saxes when it took that plunge. And I used to judge how the mid-bass was by that. Did it sound, it was one instrument? You hear a piano playing, you hear da da da, ding, ding, ding. It's coherency we didn't have then at all, or to speak of. The only time we did have it, interestingly enough, was with electrostatics. And the period of the great electrostatic thing was when we had something that would give us coherency and transparency. Unfortunately, getting electrostatics past that point was really almost impossible unless you made it as big as the side of the house, and then you couldn't drive it. There's another thing about electrostatics, but I think I won't pick on them today. We got rid of the gross colorations. We started doing dynamics. We learned that transistors did not give you depth at first, did not give you width. And then we found out something very interesting. We found out that transistors switch on and off. And the early transistors were audible in their switching on and off, whereas the tubes had a constant flow of electrons. And this led me to the concept of continuousness. And if music is continuous, when you go to a concert hall, it's not, it's all there. And I had a lot of trouble explaining continuousness to a lot of people, including myself. And one of my editors, Sally Reynolds, said, look, Harry, it's like a waterfall. It's constant. It flows. And if it flows, you begin to get it. And after 25 years, solid-state equipment is beginning to do that. But it takes a generation for any new technology to mature and to get good. Think about it. I mean, CDs right now are beginning to get good. I have some at home. They're still, well, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, what I see going on right now in the present is this. We have a whole bunch of ways to the future and a whole bunch of inventions going on. For example, there is the magnetic drive turntable. And if you have heard a magnetic drive turntable, it's very seductive because it's like riding in a car and you don't hear the wheels. So you don't hear any of that bass stuff that you take for granted in disc reproduction. And if it's not there, you hear bass like you hear off of a good CD. It really is wonderful if you can hear it. But as far as I know, there are only several turntables, and the clear audio statement, only $150,000. I'll take 2. But you know, and then there was the Baron Tim Di Parravicini did a $20,000 one, but he can't produce very many of them. But I expect to see more. What we're working on really is extraneous noise. Battery-operated components are coming up. And last night I was talking, if any of you were here, I wasn't. I talked about Enid Lumley, who was one of my discoveries way back when. And Enid, 30 years ago, in the early issues of the magazine, started talking about power line interference. And everybody thought she was crazy. She hears power line interference? Huh. John Curl came to her defense and said she is well ahead of her time. So today I'm wandering around, and guess who I bump into? John Curl. And I won't tell you the first thing he said to me, but it was 2 words. I said, you'll have to stand in line at the back. Anyway, he's got a new amplifier out that's supposed to be very reasonably priced, but he told me Enid had died last year, and I didn't know this. She had lung cancer. For a long time, I thought she was like that character in Little Abner, Joe Bafilspick, because she always had this cloud, but it was cigarette smoke. She was the Marlboro woman. So I may have left the impression she was still alive. I'm sorry, she's gone. She gave up audio a long time ago. And that brings me to another point, just briefly, and I know there's some women in the audience tonight. We were the first magazine to hire women. As reviewers, our ad salesperson was the best in the business, Chris Ewing, who was here today. I guess she gave up. We hired women editors because there's this bias in this field against women. It's a subconscious bias, I believe. But women hear better than men generally because they protect their hearing in the 4 to 8 kilohertz region, which is where we blast it and destroy the cilia there, and then we have a notch loss. So we have to make it have high definition so we can hear it, we think. So we're going through right now a whole series of battery-operated electronics, and many ways of doing it. Some are battery-operated, like I could go on and on. But what they do is they cut the power line out. And if you've heard the power line cut out, there's a kind of purity there. Now, the sacrifice they sometimes make is dynamics. Not always. But that's where the future is going. Now, there are other ways of doing that. There are devices that remove it. There's a whole slew of power conditioners out there with Teflon capacitors and everything. And let me tell you, they cost an arm, a leg, and some hair. And they're good with the Teflon caps. They really are. But there are all these strategies to get rid of the power line noise. Why? Because the power lines are getting worse and worse every year. Why? Because there's more and more use of them. At our house, we heard something in the system I didn't like. And Lou Johnson was there, so he said, let me put my oscilloscope on this. So he did, and we saw this jagged edge. So I walked out the house, down the street a little bit, and there was a buzzsaw going. And it fed right into the system. And at night, people say systems sound better at night. You know why? Less power use. So this is one of the things we're getting away from is power. And we have to learn how to describe it. Because we are not working on our language, including myself in this. We have to have new terms. We have to have new definitions in order to do this. We really do. And we have to work harder, and we have to listen more critically. And we're relying too much, I think, on the old definitions. You know, oh, it's vanilla ice cream. I love it. The absolute sound is music. I don't know. And then the evolution of transistors. And one more thing. All of the component parts of electronics, resistors, capacitors, are so much better than they were 10, 15 years ago. It's unbelievable. When Macintosh got back into the tube business, they were delighted because they thought it was going to be, what's the tubes back then? We gave up tubes. We're solid state. We're modern. And they found out that they had all these wonderful resistors and capacitors that they never knew, and they were able to do the best tube stuff they've ever done. And they're still working on it. But it was a big surprise. Now, you guys who were doing tubes and other stuff before that knew that. But there's been an evolution that has not been much reported on because what does the public want to know about Mylar capacitors? And how many people can really explain it and what it means? And I'll tell you what the problem is, I think. We've lost our big technical writers, the good ones like Richard Heiser, the people who can explain the complicated stuff in language that you and I can understand. I am not a techno freak. I really have trouble understanding some of this. They start talking about square waves and jiggity waves and grandmother's waves and stuff, and I'm like, oh, no. In any event, the future, briefly. We have the future right in front of us if we don't let these biases get us down. The dealer biases against women, the dealer biases against young people. What is the future? One of the parts of the future. How many of you guys have iPhones? Raise your hand. Go ahead. There are all sorts of devices now, computer-related, many. And what are we doing about that? We have millions of people, zillions of millions of people out there listening to music, really everywhere. Tons of them.